The Nisei soldiers of the 442nd became the most decorated regiment in U.S. military history due to their size and length of service. The Battle of the Lost Battalion during World War II has been hailed as one of the fiercest and most heroic land battles in American military history. In October 1944, as Allied forces fought to drive the Nazis out of France, a unit of Japanese-American soldiers was sent on a seemingly impossible mission. Sent into the rugged terrain of the Vosges Mountains in northeastern France, a region not militarily exposed since Roman times, they were ordered to evacuate a Texas National Guard unit stuck deep in the woods, surrounded by 6,000 Nazi soldiers. Japanese Americans known as the Nisei served with the 100th/442nd Regimental Combat Team. A separate unit commanded by white officers, the Nisei faced intense racism and discrimination at home, especially after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor prompted the U.S. to imprison many of them and their families in wartime POW camps. During the French campaign, the 442nd included the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions, the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion, and the 232nd Engineer Company. All this played a decisive role. The Nisei knew that many would not return from the rescue operation. Previous attempts were unsuccessful, suffering heavy losses. The trapped Texans were sorely short of ammunition and rations. But the Nisei fought furiously at close quarters, pushing their way through muddy forest and mined roads in inclement weather, sometimes 4-1. When the mission was completed, the 442nd fully lived up to its chosen motto, "Go ahead," becoming the most decorated regiment in U.S. military history in terms of size and length of service. Liberation of the French cities, Bruyères and Béfontaine. When the 442nd arrived in France on October 8, 1944, it was assigned to the 36th Infantry Division, which also included Texans. Under the command of Major General John Dahlquist, they fought aggressively to liberate French cities and push the Nazis across the German border. But both the Nazis and the mountains turned out to be formidable. As bone-piercing rain fell over the region, the Nisei arrived still dressed in their summer uniforms. Most arrived by road, but some traveled in railroad boxcars reeking of horse manure, a visceral reminder of the stables where Japanese-American families were sent to American collection centers prior to their imprisonment in the camps under President Franklin Roosevelt's decree. The first mission of the Vosges of Nisei was the liberation of two small towns, Bruyères, which required overtaking the four surrounding hills, and Béfontaine. The campaign began on October 15 in terrible conditions. Fog and dense vegetation limited the visibility of the Nisei to a dozen yards. The cold rain soaked their uniforms, socks, and boots, and the Nazis aimed their artillery shells at the tops of the trees, so when they exploded, shrapnel rained down on the Nisei soldiers. By the end of the first day, the 442nd had advanced only 500 yards. After 3 days of fierce fighting over the four hills, the Nisei entered Bruyères and engaged in fierce door-to-door fighting. By the night of October 18, they liberated the city. But there was a high price to pay. There were so many dead people on the road that they had to bring in a bulldozer to push them off the road. The officers of the 100th Battalion, 442nd Regiment, believed that the tiny neighboring village of Béfontaine had no tactical value, but General Dahlquist ordered them to enter. They entered the city under enemy fire, and for some time were cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Exhausted after 8 days of fighting and hiding in the cellars of ruined buildings as the Germans yelled at them to surrender, the 100th held on tight until reinforcements arrived. On October 23, they managed to free Béfontaine, but in doing so they lost many of their most experienced officers and men. How the Texans fell into the trap. On October 24, the 442nd received a well-deserved rest. One of the units that succeeded them was the 1st Battalion, 141st Texas National Guard, which consisted of approximately 275 white American soldiers. The Texans marched 4 miles and occupied 2 hills outside Béfontaine, unaware that the Nazis were allowing them to pass. only to then attack the rear of the column and block any retreat or resupply with landmines and machine gun nests. The Texans are trapped. The next day, 2 other battalions of the 141st unsuccessfully tried to break out of the Nazi death grip. That same day, the Texans sent a 36-man patrol to try and break through. Only 5 returned. Chronology of the rescue of the Lost Battalion. October 26. Initially, General Dahlquist ordered the Nisei, resting only 2 days, to make a frontal attack on the hill where the Texans were stranded. But his officers argued that such a maneuver would result in heavy losses, suggesting instead to outflank the Nazis. 27 October. Nisei soldiers are mobilized on both sides of the ridge of the road north of Baffontaine. German anti-personnel mines, thick undergrowth, thick woods, and persistent defense slowed the advance of the Nisei. October 28. Under heavy artillery and mortar fire and mounting casualties, they advanced to within 1,500 yards of the Texans. October 29. The command of the Nisei Battalion received a radio message that the situation of the Texans had become desperate. A platoon of tanks arrived, covering their 75mm guns with fire, but the Nisei infantrymen fell alone to continue climbing a steep cliff swarming with the Nazis, later called Suicide Hill. After the order to fix the bayonets, the men of I and K companies rose, firing from the hip, advancing as one, led by their commander. At the sight of this action, the Germans, who had just participated in a fierce 30-minute firefight, threw up their weapons and fled from their positions. At about the same time, 3,000 yards to the rear, E and F companies used pincers to outflank the Nazis as planned an attack from behind, while G Company moved forward, catching the enemy by surprise. Coordinated actions destroyed the Germans. 30 October. I Company made first contact with the Lost Battalion. A radio message from the Texans said, "Patrol from 442 here. Tell them we love them." Approximately 211 soldiers out of the original 275 Lost Battalions survived the siege. High losses, high rewards. Nearly 2 weeks later, on November 12, General Dahlquist ordered a review of the 442nd Regiment. Seeing that only part of the unit was assembled, the general warned the acting regiment commander about the loss of troops in the ranks. "Where are they?" Dahlquist asked. Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Miller replied, "That's all that's left." Between 14 and 31 October, the 442nd suffered over 800 casualties during the campaigns to liberate Bruyères, Biffontaine, and the Lost Battalion. They were deployed again on 13 November. Praise and accolades for the 442nd Go for Broke Battle Group have been pouring in from President Truman and ending. They were excellent. General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, later said of the 442nd Division, "They have suffered huge losses. They showed rare courage and incredible fighting spirit. Everyone wanted them." Among the many awards, 5 Nisei soldiers received medals of honor for their actions in the Vosges: George Sakato, Barney Hajiro, James Okubo, Robert Kuroda, and Joe Nishimoto. In 1962, Texas Governor John Connally paid tribute to the entire division by making them all honorary Texans.